This is the satisfiement that no one in Washington wanted to see. For 70 years, the Western alliance held. NATO stood. The Five Eyes watched. The G7 met and agreed and moved forward as one. America led and the world followed. That era ended this week. As of Wednesday morning, March 11th, 2026, the People's Republic of China has formally endorsed Canada's position in its escalating trade war with the United States. Read that again. China backing Canada against America. This is not a diplomatic courtesy. This is not a vague statement of concern from a foreign ministry spokesperson at a routine press briefing. This is a strategic realignment of global power happening in real time, and it is the direct, measurable, predictable consequence of one man's refusal to stop swinging a wrecking ball at every alliance America has built since 1945. Donald Trump, already reeling from a Supreme Court that just struck down his tariff authority 3 weeks ago, already bleeding from a trade war that has cost American households an average of $1,300 this year, according to the Tax Foundation, already watching his poll numbers crater among independents in every swing state, has now achieved something no American president has ever achieved. He has pushed America's closest neighbor into the arms of America's greatest rival, and Beijing is smiling. In this report, we are going to break down exactly how this happened. We are going to trace the diplomatic trail from Ottawa to Beijing. We are going to explain the financial mechanism that makes this emerging alliance devastating for American workers and American national security. And we are going to answer the question every strategist in Washington is asking tonight. Is this reversible, or have we already lost the world? Stay with me. This one matters more than anything we have covered this year. To understand why Mark Carney was shaking hands with Xi Jinping inside the Great Hall of the People last month, you have to understand what happened to Canada over the past 12 months. Because this didn't start with China. This started with Donald Trump calling Canada a national security threat. Remember that. The President of the United States looked at the country that supplies 60% of America's crude oil imports, 85% of its electricity imports, and is the top export destination for 36 of the 50 states, and he called it an emergency. He invoked the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, a law designed for hostile foreign adversaries against America's closest ally and largest trading partner. He slapped 25% tariffs on Canadian goods in March of 2025. He raised them to 35% in August. He called Prime Minister Carney Governor Carney on Truth Social, a deliberate and calculated humiliation designed to reduce a sovereign democratic nation to a subsidiary. He posted altered maps on social media showing Canada absorbed into the United States as the 51st state. He suggested using economic force to annex Canadian territory. Nearly $3.6 billion in goods and services cross the U.S.-Canada border every single day. And the president treated that relationship like a casino debt he could strong-arm away. For a year, Ottawa tried to negotiate. Carney reached out through diplomatic channels. Canadian trade officials flew to Washington repeatedly. Business leaders on both sides of the border lobbied for calm. The Canadian Chamber of Commerce issued statement after statement about the mutual benefits of free trade. Nothing worked. Every olive branch was met with another tariff, another insult, another Truth Social post dripping with contempt for Canadian sovereignty. So Canada made a decision. If the United States was going to treat its closest ally like an adversary, then Canada would find new partners. And the biggest potential partner on earth was waiting in Beijing with open arms. And here is where it gets serious. On January 16th, 2026, Mark Carney became the first Canadian Prime Minister to visit China since 2017. He walked into the Great Hall of the People and met Xi Jinping face to face. He announced what he called a new strategic partnership, a phrase that in diplomatic language is one step short of a formal alliance. The details of the deal are staggering. Canada agreed to slash its 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles down to 6.1%, the most favored nation rate. In exchange, Beijing dropped retaliatory tariffs on Canadian canola seed oil from 85% down to 15%, effective March 1st. Tariffs on Canadian lobster, crab, peas, and canola meal were suspended through at least the end of 2026. Visa-free travel for Canadians to China was announced immediately. Joint statements were issued promising cooperation on trade, energy, public security, culture, and multilateralism. But here is what the mainstream media is not telling you about this deal. The tariff numbers are just the surface. The real agreement is about supply chains, and specifically about the minerals that will define the 21st century economy. Canada has the world's fourth largest reserves of rare earth elements. It sits on massive deposits of lithium, cobalt, and nickel, the exact minerals that power every electric vehicle battery, every smartphone, every military drone, every guided missile system. China currently controls roughly 60% of global rare earth processing capacity. Beijing already played this card during the trade war in 2025, restricting rare earth exports and sending shockwaves through global defense and technology supply chains. A Canada-China minerals partnership does not just hurt American car companies. It threatens the entire defense industrial base of the United States. The Pentagon has been quietly issuing warnings about rare earth dependency for over a decade. And Donald Trump just handed Beijing the keys to the solution on a silver platter by driving Canada straight into their arms. Don't go anywhere. The most explosive part is coming next. Because Canada is not alone in this pivot. It is not even close to alone. Since the start of January 2026, at least 5 national leaders from Western allied nations have personally traveled to Beijing to meet with Xi Jinping. We are talking about British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who made the first visit by a UK leader in 8 years and brought 60 British companies with him. We are talking about South Korean President Lee Jae-myung, whose country hosts 35,000 American troops. We are talking about Finnish Prime Minister Petteri Orpo, a NATO ally that shares an 800-mile border with Russia. We are talking about Irish Taoiseach Michael Martin, the first Irish leader to visit China in 14 years. We are talking about German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, the leader of the largest economy in Europe. These are not adversarial nations. These are the core of the Western alliance. These are NATO members, Five Eyes partners, G7 participants, countries that American soldiers have fought and died alongside for generations. And one by one, they are sitting in the Great Hall of the People, signing trade deals, announcing strategic partnerships, and publicly praising China as, and I quote, a more predictable partner. Think about the weight of that word. Predictable. They are saying out loud to the entire world on camera that the communist government of China is more reliable than the United States of America under Donald Trump. Starmer's delegation resulted in AstraZeneca announcing $15 billion in Chinese investment through 2030. The European Union reached an agreement to replace tariffs on Chinese EVs with minimum price commitments, effectively dismantling one of the West's primary trade defenses against Beijing's subsidized manufacturing. France's Macron visited in December. Uruguay's President Orsi visited in February, the first South American leader to go since Trump seized Venezuelan President Maduro. This is not hedging. This is not diplomatic courtesy. This is a realignment of the global order, and it is happening because of one thing and one thing only. Donald Trump made the cost of being America's ally higher than the cost of being China's partner. And here is where the constitutional crisis meets the geopolitical catastrophe. On February 20th, 2026, the United States Supreme Court ruled 6-3 in Learning Resources, Inc. versus Trump that the president had no legal authority to impose tariffs under IEEPA. Chief Justice John Roberts, writing for the majority alongside Justices Sotomayor, Kagan, Gorsuch, Barrett, and Jackson, said the 2 words regulate and importation in the statute could not bear the weight of the president's sweeping tariff regime. The ruling invalidated the legal foundation for nearly every country-specific tariff Trump had imposed since taking office in January 2025. The government's own estimates say it collected $166 billion from over 330,000 American businesses, using a power the Supreme Court just said he never had. Penn Wharton economists put the number even higher, between $175 and $179 billion, more than the combined annual budgets of the Department of Transportation and the Department of Justice. Within hours of the ruling, Trump signed a proclamation imposing new tariffs under Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974, initially at 10%, raised to 15% by the next morning. But here is the critical difference that changes everything. Section 122 tariffs expire in 150 days unless Congress votes to extend them. That clock runs out in late July 2026, just as the midterm election cycle reaches full intensity. Congressional Republicans would have to vote, on the record in front of their constituents to extend tariffs that economists across the political spectrum agree have raised consumer prices without meaningfully reducing the trade deficit. 6 House Republicans already crossed party lines in February to vote against the president's tariff authority. 3 more voted to end the congressional prohibition on overriding tariffs. The coalition is fracturing, and every ally who fled to Beijing knows it. They are not making permanent strategic decisions based on a 150-day tariff with shaky legal foundations. They are making permanent strategic decisions based on the permanent instability of American trade policy. The tariff is not the weapon anymore. The chaos is the weapon. The unpredictability is the poison. Now let me explain why this is a 5-alarm fire for the American economy and for every working family in this country. The USMCA, the very trade agreement that Donald Trump himself celebrated as one of his greatest achievements during his first term, is up for its mandatory 6-year review on July 1st, 2026. This is the agreement that governs nearly $2 trillion in annual trade between the United States, Canada, and Mexico. A single automotive part can cross the U.S.-Canada border 7 or more times during production before a car rolls off the assembly line. 14 million American jobs depend directly on North American trade integration. If the review fails, if any party refuses to renew, a 10-year sunset countdown begins and the agreement expires permanently in 2036. But here is the knife's edge nobody in the media is explaining clearly enough. Canada and Mexico are now coordinating their positions against the United States. Canada's Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc announced that Ottawa is pursuing bilateral deals with Washington on steel, aluminum, and automotive tariffs alongside the formal USMCA process. Mexico and Canada issued a joint action plan to be presented to their leaders in the first half of 2026. They are not negotiating as junior partners anymore. They are negotiating as a unified bloc. And behind them, standing in the shadows with a checkbook and a smile, is Beijing, ready to absorb whatever trade the United States pushes away. U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer told Congress in December that he would not recommend renewing the USMCA without major changes. Trump called the agreement he once praised irrelevant. Sources inside the Canadian Trade Ministry described the mood as resigned but strategic. One senior official reportedly said, and this is a direct quote from internal communications obtained by diplomatic sources, "We are not going to beg Washington for a deal that Washington itself built and now wants to destroy." If the USMCA collapses, the cross-border supply chains that power the North American economy will be shattered. And every single one of those 14 million jobs becomes a hostage to a president who treats trade policy as a weapon rather than a framework for shared prosperity. But wait, it gets worse, because the world is not just realigning economically. It is realigning strategically, and the defense implications are terrifying. Canada sits on the northern border of the United States. It controls access to the Arctic, where China has been aggressively building shipping infrastructure and commercial routes. Canada is a founding NATO member and a Five Eyes intelligence sharing partner. Chinese investment in Canadian critical minerals means Chinese influence over supply chains the Pentagon depends on for everything from F-35 fighter jets to Patriot missile systems. Chinese visa-free travel to Canada means dramatically increased intelligence collection opportunities right on America's doorstep. And if Beijing secures preferential access to Canadian rare earths and lithium deposits, it can throttle American defense manufacturing anytime it wants, not by cutting off its own exports, which the world would see coming, but by redirecting Canadian supply away from American buyers, quietly, contractually, legally. Meanwhile, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi stood at a podium on March 8th and declared China the world's most important force for peace, stability, and justice. He said attempts to bypass the United Nations and create exclusive clubs, a direct shot at Trump's Board of Peace, gain no support and are unsustainable. Beijing is welcoming Western leaders with state dinners and billion-dollar investment deals while positioning themselves as the adults in the room. The Communist Party's International Affairs Department published an article in the official People's Daily saying that China's modernization breaks a Western-centric model and gives developing countries a new choice. This is not subtle propaganda. This is a coordinated campaign to replace the American-led international order with a Chinese-led alternative. And the most frightening part is that it is working. Not because China has suddenly become trustworthy, not because anyone in Ottawa or London or Berlin has forgotten about Xinjiang or Hong Kong or the threats against Taiwan. It is working because Donald Trump has made the alternative, being America's ally, so expensive, so unpredictable, so deeply humiliating that even mature democracies with 70 years of shared history with Washington are willing to take a chance on Beijing. So how does this end? It ends one of three ways, and none of them are good. Scenario 1, Trump backs down, drops the tariffs, renews the USMCA, and tries to rebuild alliances. This would require him to admit he was wrong, something he has never done in his entire public life. His base would see it as surrender. His approval among core supporters would collapse, and the primary challenge in 2028 would begin immediately. Scenario 2, Trump doubles down, threatens Canada with the 100% tariff he promised on Truth Social, blows up the USMCA review, and forces a full economic decoupling from America's two largest trading partners simultaneously. The economic devastation would be immediate. Supply chains that took decades to build would unravel in months. Job losses in Michigan, Ohio, Texas, and every border state would be catastrophic. Scenario 3, and this is the scenario that the strategists in Beijing are betting on, the scenario that keeps National Security Council staffers awake at 3 in the morning. The chaos continues. No resolution, no clarity, no coherent strategy, just an endless cycle of threats, reversals, legal challenges, court rulings, truth social rants, and diplomatic humiliations that slowly convinces every nation on earth that America is no longer a reliable partner for anything. This is death by 1,000 cuts, and every cut is self-inflicted. Watch the USMCA review on July 1st. Watch the Section 122 tariff expiration in late July. Watch the Trump-Xi summit from March 31st to April 2nd, because whatever deal gets announced in Beijing will tell you exactly how much leverage America has already lost. Watch the midterm polls, because if Republican candidates in swing districts start running away from tariff policy, the entire trade strategy collapses overnight and takes the legislative agenda with it. Watch what happens when those $166 billion in illegal IEPA tariffs have to be refunded because the Court of International Trade has already ordered repayment, and that money is coming out of the federal budget at the worst possible time. And most importantly, watch what Canada does next. Because if Ottawa moves from a strategic partnership with Beijing to a comprehensive free trade agreement, if they formalize the minerals corridor, if they open the door to Chinese infrastructure investment in the Arctic, the map of the world changes permanently. The borders stay the same, but the lines of power, the flows of resources, the architecture of influence that American blood and treasure built over 80 years, all of it shifts eastward. And it shifts toward Beijing. For one man sitting in the Oval Office, this was supposed to be the easy part. Tariffs were the hammer. Every country was a nail. But the nails are building their own house now. They are building it with Chinese steel and Canadian rare earths and European technology. And they are inviting Beijing to the housewarming. Trump's worst nightmare was never a military invasion. It was never a terrorist attack on American soil. It is irrelevance. It is the world deciding it simply does not need America anymore. And that nightmare is no longer hypothetical. It is on the front page of every newspaper in every capital on earth this morning. Subscribe. Share this with everyone who needs to hear it. The history books will record this month as the moment America's allies started walking toward the exit. The doors are wide open, and Beijing is holding them.